Okay, Megan, it is Wednesday, June, I think it's 23rd. There's a lot to unpack today. We started by talking about the increase in gun sales across the US. Um, and uh, your anecdote is, because your brother in law, who owns a gun store or a gun shop or a gun place in North Carolina, that bastion of liberalism, North Carolina, um, has seen an uptick in business. Then that you know just goes to prove that people are quickly leaving the cities in droves, um, scared for their lives, and you'd like to paint a picture that all of the metropolitan areas across the country are, these hellscapes, and everybody's, it's just chaos and pandemonium, but it's really not. Yes, there has been an increase in crime. Yes, New York did lose a congressional seat from, a lower population than the last census. But you also have to remember, we had a census taken during a pandemic. Um, a lot of people left New York City, specifically. Maybe you did too, Megan. Uh, when lockdown came, to find more adaptable living situations. In New York, we live in tiny little spots, all crunched together. A lot of young people didn't need to be paying rent on expensive apartments when there was nothing to do, and could go live with their parents. You fucked off to Virginia. Um, so, yeah, a lot of people didn't live in New York at the time when we took the census, which is really unfortunate. As things start to open up, and businesses are going to start requiring in-person working again, there will be more people coming back into the city, which is probably going to happen in the fall, unless, of course, a variant gets us. But it's not the hellscape that you want it to be. You also said that in the New York City mayoral race, that the candidate who won ran on Law and Order. Nobody won. It was a primary, first of all, and we have ranked choice voting. So there has been no winner of the Democratic primary as of yet. There are still a lot of votes to count. They have to go through the ranked choice calculations. So, incorrect statement that a new New York mayor has been chosen. He's also a moron, so I hope he's not the candidate, but that's time for another show. And we're talking about, we're talking about an increase in gun violence. You're talking about, the messaging from the Democrats about defund the police, and that's scaring people. And Joy very astutely pointed out, there really hasn't been a massive defund the police movement anywhere in the country. There's been a lot of talk about it, a lot of talk about police reform, but the people who use the expression defund the police the most are Republicans and Republican pundits on television, Republican media, people like you, who just keep repeating it when the Democrats aren't continually repeating it. We're still talking about police reform. And very much like in what Val Demings was talking about, community policing. The police force in New York City, most of them don't live in the city. They live in Jersey and Long Island, and even the ones that do live in the city don't live in the precinct in which they're working. That's a problem, and that's I think that's a problem in many major urban areas, that I don't know how you fix, because there isn't always affordable housing in every neighborhood. I'm surprised you didn't jump on the story about the Portland police, the Special Forces Squad, whatever it was, where one of the officers was convicted of, he abused someone. I don't remember the specifics. he committed a crime against a civilian. He was prosecuted for it and was found guilty, and the entire force quit in solidarity. That's exactly part of the problem with the police, Meghan. If you're all going to say, oh, one bad apple spoils the bunch, and all the rest of those apples don't work to kick the bad one out of the bucket, then all those apples are spoiled. And they just showed, you couldn't get a clearer demonstration of, if we have to be held accountable for what we do as police officers, we're not going to do this job. That's bullshit. They shouldn't be police officers. And if, there is, it's not if, I mean, there is a reduction in people willing to become police officers, which is a problem, but it's also an opportunity to use that as a way to rethink, what do we need the police to do, and what could we be engaging other agencies to be doing to help keep us safe. The bigger concern about people who are leaving professions and people not joining it is teachers. But I didn't see anybody talk about that today. We just rather talk about, how everybody wants to buy more guns. Then we moved on to, oh, right, vaccine hesitancy. And, we're talking about tens of millions of people that are not getting a vaccine. And your answer is, well, women who are pregnant or are trying to get pregnant are really scared. And you go on this whole thing about how scary it is to try to get pregnant and to be pregnant and all that, just because it happened to you last year. That's your only frame of reference. And you want, the Biden administration to do a hand-holding process with women. I think that's because you offered to help the Biden administration with this effort, and they said, no, thanks. See ya. Good try. So I think you're a little, rolling in the bitter barn about that a little bit. But in terms of, what we're going to be able to do in the after times, right? As unvaccinated people, or as vaccinated people versus the ones that were unvaccinated. There is going to be a difference. We are going to see, people who are vaccinated have the ability to do things that people who are unvaccinated cannot. I'm surprised you didn't bring up the situation in, I believe it was Oklahoma or Arkansas. Apologies to both states that I mix them up all the time. Where 150 healthcare workers were fired or quit because they refused to get a vaccine that was required by their health system. You work in a healthcare. You're around people who are ill. You can't be a carrier of this virus, giving it to other people who are patients that are in the hospital. And whether you're, a primary caregiver or a porter, or working in a cafeteria, if you're in a healthcare environment, there are requirements. And I mean, not to get personal, but when I worked for the healthcare system in Canada, I worked in the office. I wasn't even in healthcare facilities, and I had to show proof of vaccination. So, obviously we didn't have COVID back then, but it's a thing that's within healthcare. So I think you're going to see it in sectors. But as far as you're concerned, it's just mothers and people who want to be mothers. Those are the only ones not getting vaccinated. So way to miss the mark on that one too. And then you really tried to nail Bernie Sanders into some sort of anti-Semitic stance. You tried to word it carefully. I'm not talking about Israeli policy. We're talking about Israel itself. Well, he was very clear about having a consistent stance on Israel, and made your questions look like grade school. But you also called him the godfather of the squad, which I thought was interesting. Because that's you just want to paint everybody with the same brush. You love to talk about the squad. and how liberal they are. Which, quite frankly, if you look back at public policy 40 years ago, the squad's not all that progressive. 60 years ago, it's that the Republicans have moved so far right that anything that even seems logical is now considered wildly liberal. And that's all because of the demonization process from the GOP to the Democrats over the last several decades. Um, you know, oh, socialism. Yeah, like, you know, the fire department is so bad. It's socialism. Anyway, uh, yeah, you tried to say he was the defender of the squad, and I don't know if it's just that, you know, these women are like self-made successful women, that they threaten you so much because they got where they did on merit and you didn't, even though, you know, you think that this is a great meritocracy. It seems that people who actually become successful on merit, specifically women of your age, or in your age group or younger, are really threatening to you. Um, Other people's successes don't mean it's someone else's failure, right? We can all succeed together in our own lanes. Um, so that was a big day. And I don't, the whole thing about the relationship, who gives a shit? You know, if we're not, you don't like to talk about relationships anyway, because as we know, you made it very clear several weeks ago that all powerful women cheat on their wives, and that's just the way it is, and they should just accept it. So, you know, if you were in the situation, you would just know that Ben was cheating on you. So, great, congratulations.